Hi, everybody. So I want to talk a little bit this morning about The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman, which is the first literary text that we'll be reading together this semester. And it's definitely very much an introductory piece and an occasional piece. It's obviously part of the inauguration ceremonies for the new president on January the 20th, and I hope that some of you have seen it already in the video clip that I circulated on the Canvas page, or maybe live that afternoon if you were watching it the way I was. What's really interesting about this poem, from the point of view of an English professor, and I hope from the point of view of you guys who are in English class, is to think about how it demonstrates the relationship between poetry as a oral performance art and poetry as a written text. So one of the things I'd like us to do is look at the text of Amanda Gorman's poem and also look at her performance of it. And I really encourage you to read through the poem at least once, but then make sure you watch and listen to her read it, because she's truly a spoken word poet. I mean, she's coming out of the spoken word tradition, which is an important tradition, both an ancient tradition in poetry, the oldest tradition we have, and also a very powerful tradition in the present. One of the things that I think is particularly interesting about Gorman's poem is how much she gives it as a performance, how well she enables the structure, the sound, the movement, the shifts in the timing in the poem come through in performance in a really powerful way. One of the reasons you can see this, and one of the things maybe some of you will already have noticed about it, is that she's significantly indebted to Lin-Manuel Miranda and Hamilton and the tradition of rap poetry and rap music more broadly. And this is obviously something that she does intentionally. She refers to Hamilton, she alludes to Hamilton directly twice in the poem, at least, maybe more than that. But what I thought we would do with this as a kind of reading exercise is to think of how she uses four kind of fundamental techniques that are present in almost all English language poetry and most poetry in other languages as well, and specifically present in this poem. So I wrote these down for you on the Google Doc that we'll be sharing this semester. So you don't have to take notes on this video, but you can maybe use the video to sort of refer back and forth to your notes in the Google Doc, especially if you're having trouble signing into it. Usually it takes a couple days to get everybody signed in, which is all fine, but please do sign in. And if you're having problems, let me know, ask for access under a different email, whatever. So the four techniques that I wanted to talk about here, and these are sort of fundamental basic poetic techniques that many of you will have encountered before in previous classes where you've been reading poetry, or in poetry that you're reading or writing yourself. So the first of them is alliteration, the repetition of initial consonants. And we see this in the very opening two lines of her poem. It's actually something she uses constantly. It's her most, that she is most prolific in her use of alliteration, and it's one of the oldest techniques in English. So I'll read the first two lines. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The lost we carry, a sea we must wade. And the repetition of the W sound and also the WH sound. So we, where, we, wade, just in the course of the first two lines, is this kind of, that's alliteration. I mean, on the most basic level, she's repeating that sound, but she repeats that sound in order to call attention to those words. One of the ways that poetry operates is one of the distinctions between poetry and prose is it operates on this level of sound as well as the level of syntax. It's important what the words mean and what the sentences add up to, and that's a kind of baseline shared text for this poem, but it's also important the way in which the sounds that she uses call attention to different words and bring them into relationship with each other. Another way she does this is rhyme, which is, again, one of the most common baseline elements of English language poetry. We see it, she uses some end rhyme, but she also uses a lot of rhyme between between the end of one line and the middle of the next line. So in lines 2 and 3, the rhyme between beast and peace, we braved the belly of the beast. We learn that quiet isn't always peace. But that isn't quite the end of the second line, although the delineation isn't totally clear on my document here either. But the way in which the shared sound, the rhyme sound of the words beast and peace, which is an interesting pair of words to bring together, like that itself is also really a way, like one of the ways she makes meaning is she asks us to hold those two words that sound similar to each other in relationship with each other. The third, and this is the third of the sort of musical elements, if you will, of the poetry that she uses really um, really quite a lot and really beautifully and powerfully, is what's called cezura. And this is a little bit more obscure, but it's just a Latin word that means pause or space. And a cezura is just a space in the middle of a line. So line 5, you can and you can really hear this more clearly if you watch her perform. She's a really powerful performer, as I said, and one of the things she does is she performs these pauses really well. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. The pause between ours and before, the dawn is ours before we knew it. That is a kind of an opening in the poem. And it's a place that asks us to pause a little bit when we listen or read and to interpret, to make meaning, to figure out what she's up to, if you will. And then the fourth, which is the more textual and sort of literary, not as dependent on spoken or oral performance, is the question of illusion, the allusion to another text, a gesture toward any other text. And there are lots and lots of allusions in here. The two that I mentioned on the Google Doc that I'll just draw out for you quickly in this YouTube are the reference to a union which is more perfect, which is her play on the more perfect union of the preamble to the United States Constitution, obviously an important document for the swearing in of a new president. And then a kind of triple allusion a little bit farther down, about halfway through, in which she describes or she quotes the phrase, "Everyone must sit under their own vine and fig tree." And that's actually a triple allusion, which is kind of a neat project. It refers both to the Hebrew scriptures, in particular Micah 4:4, although it shows up in a couple other places in the Hebrew scriptures as well. It's a reference to George Washington, who I think used this phrase something like 50 times in his letters. And I think this is the one that maybe most of us, including me, noticed first. It's a reference to Hamilton and to the song "One Last Time" in the musical Hamilton, in which Lin-Manuel Miranda and his characters, quote this moment from, they quote Washington quoting the Hebrew scriptures. So it's a moment in which she's gathering together and gathering into her poem all of these things: the history of George Washington, our first president, the history of the Hebrew scriptures, the history of Lin-Manuel Miranda's, blockbuster Broadway sensation, the musical Hamilton. And like that's the way allusions work. They're about drawing together. I mean, in some ways, the same way alliteration and rhyme work, to bring things that wouldn't obviously be together into connection and into relationship with each other. So I look forward to talking more with you about this poem. I haven't gotten at all to Masha Genin's really interesting and exciting reading of the poem "The New Yorker," but maybe that's something we can pick up on the discussion thread. All right, thanks.